We'll get started. Good evening and welcome to this evening's Etche Speaker Series and UIS Black History Month event, Black Lives Matter Through the Prism of Frederick Douglass. During tonight's discussion, we will highlight two important Etche themes: recognizing our social responsibility towards our larger communities and developing an awareness of and respect for the diversity of cultures and peoples in this country and the world. These themes were as central to Frederick Douglass's writings and speeches as they are to the Black Lives Matter movement today. When we say Black Lives Matter, we are not only referring to police brutality and mass incarceration, but the systemic omission of important historical figures from our educational curricula. How many people here learned about Frederick Douglass during elementary or high school? Raise your hand if you remember. Okay, good. My intention is not to blame any individual in the audience who may not have learned that, but to give just one example of how our system is biased against the lives of African Americans. Therefore, it is our social responsibility to inform and educate ourselves in order to correct these omissions and recognize that the historical contributions of our black brothers and sisters are just as important as those of whites. So, for those of us I'm not touching anything. It's coming from somewhere else. Is there another?
These two might be.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so in order to put this event into context, I thought I would give a brief biography of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery around the year 1818. His mother, a black slave, was an irregular presence in his life before she died when he was around 10. He never had a relationship with his father, a white plantation owner. He was raised initially by his maternal grandmother, but was sent to Baltimore to work as a servant when he was 12. While a teenager in Baltimore, Douglass began to learn to read and write. Initially, his master's wife, Sophia Ald, taught him, but later, under pressure from her husband, she stopped. After that, he secretly continued to teach himself, a process which he later credited with defining his views on freedom and human rights. Douglass fought for many years for his freedom and finally got it in 1838, when he was about 20 years old. At this time, he married Anne Murray, a free black woman, and the couple took the name Douglass to avoid detection by his previous owners. He became a licensed preacher in 1839 and came to be known for his eloquent writings and speeches against the institution of slavery. He published his first autobiography in 1845 and traveled to Ireland and England the same year, where he toured for 2 years and spoke to crowded halls against slavery. After returning to the United States in 1847, Douglass continued to gain fame as a human rights advocate. By the time of the Civil War, he was one of the most famous black men in the country, known for his eloquent speeches against slavery and for women's rights. After the Civil War, Douglass received several political appointments. He was sent by President Grant to the West Indies as part of a commission to investigate the possibility of annexing Santo Domingo to serve as a state for African Americans. In 1872, he became the first African American to be nominated for vice president. In 1874, he was appointed as United States Marshal for the District of Columbia. And in 1888, at the Republican National Convention, he became the first African American to receive a vote for president by a major political party. Douglass continued to publish newspapers and books, as well as to speak publicly both in the U.S. and internationally, until his death at 77. He died of natural causes in 1895, and thousands of people passed by his coffin to show their respect at the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. He is buried in the Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester, New York. Now, Dr. Ty Dooley will introduce or give some background on the event.
Thank you, Sophia. So first, I want to go ahead and thank UIS for providing the venue for this. I want to thank the Etche Speaker Series for providing the venue for this event. I want to go ahead and thank our panelists, Jerry Doss, Tessica Dooley, Tiffany Saunders, and Doreen Brand for participating respectively. We're well represented both from public health, from the public administration program, from legal studies, from the community, and from the Diversity Center. So I want to thank you all for coming out as well. This is really an interesting topic, and it's timely, and we're well overdue for actually having a discussion here at UIS. I guess to sort of open this up to give a little bit of context, and Sophia did a great job. But in 1857, some things were happening in America. We were engaged in 3 different wars. There was the Mormon War out in Utah. There was a Seminole War down in Florida. And then there was a Kansas conflict in terms of whether or not Kansas would be admitted as either a slave or a free state. From the perspective of liberty, only white males above the age of 21 who owned property could actually vote. So that would actually eliminate most of you from actually engaging in voting. And even then, you could not actually vote for your senator. The senators were actually elected by state legislators. So I wanted to give a little bit of context in terms of what was going on, in Frederick Douglass's mind during this time frame. When we think about this notion of justice, there wasn't a whole lot of justice for very many Americans in the United States at that time. Now, in appeal to your better angels and in the context of a conversation on race and culture, today's panel discussion is really recognition of the plight that at-risk populations face in general and African Americans in particular. Now, in the context of this conversation and on race and culture in America, to say that all lives matter does not address the issue at hand, and it tends to minimize, and it does nothing to address the frustration, the anger, and despair experienced by so many African American communities across this country today. One of the tenets of the ETI speaker series is the recognition of the social responsibility of the individual within their larger community and an awareness and respect for the diversity of others. I can think of few things that are more important than the applications of these tenets by those that we entrust to safeguard our communities. And by that, I'm talking about the police. I'm talking about law enforcement. We are all part of a great society, this American experiment. We are all in this together. And for those that think that this doesn't really apply to them, that this is an African American male problem, maybe it is now, but I would say to you that you're next. What we really are speaking about today are issues of justice. That we live in a rational legal society, and the notion that the United States is a society which contains equal parts liberty and equal parts justice. You may not know this, but in the Constitution, in the preamble, the concept of justice was the first principle detailed. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice to ensure domestic tranquility, and you probably have heard the rest. In a just society, the equal application of the law is fundamental. There should not be a distinction of results relative to our interaction with police. Whether you are white, black, immigrant or citizen, Muslim or Christian, male or female, the interaction should be the same. The police must adhere to the laws that they are sworn to protect, or we must hold them accountable. What we are also speaking about today, and while we have this up to date, the first part of this is about the notion of and we'll talk about this a little bit more, the nature of morality. And so when we think about this notion of morality and the constant vigilance that surrounds morality and having a moral criminal justice system, not just one that's legally accountable or ethically accountable, but morally accountable. As a Christian, as a citizen, as an African American, this concept of morality serves as an aspirational compass for me and for how I interpret these issues of justice. For those who would scoff at this notion of morality, I'd like to paraphrase Tolstoy, arguably one of the greatest Russian writers. You're on a planet right now that rotates 1,000 miles an hour. You travel 24,000 miles more or less over the course of a day. yet you don't feel it. So when we ponder the notion of morality and the existence of God, just because you don't see him doesn't mean that he's not there. It is my hope that our discussion tonight will make you uncomfortable, maybe inspire you a little, but most importantly, motivate you to be an engaged and a moral citizen. And I look forward to our conversation.